You ever feel like your whole life has been an investment, only to find out the people you poured it into don't even care? That was me, sitting at my kitchen table in Chicago, staring at the mail stacked in front of me. And in that moment, I realized I had to make them pay, but not with anger, with something far more satisfying. I spent 40 years raising my kids, sacrificing everything I had, and when it came time to retire, they treated me like I was invisible. But I made sure that the moment they thought they'd inherit my life savings, they got the shock of their lives. I'm Thiago Oliveira, originally from São Paulo, Brazil, now living in Chicago. I worked in construction and later in management, juggling multiple jobs to give my children, Gabriella, 35, and Lucas, 32, the life I never had. Over the years, subtle slights turned into blatant disrespect, invitations ignored, mocking comments, entitlement. It all piled up. By my 65th birthday, I knew I had to make a choice: stay invisible and powerless, or finally turn the tables. Anyway, I moved to the United States when I was 22, full of hope, a duffel bag, and the dream of giving my future children opportunities I never had in São Paulo. I worked my hands to the bone: construction in the scorching summers, office work in the winters, all while keeping my family afloat. Gabriella, my eldest, was always sharp, but even as a teenager, she had a sharp tongue. Lucas, my youngest, was charming, but entitled. At first, I brushed off their attitude. Teenage rebellion, I told myself. But by the time they were in their 30s, it had evolved into blatant disrespect. Every phone call from Gabriella included a subtle complaint. "Dad, why do you insist on living so frugally? You have enough money to enjoy yourself, you know." Lucas would scoff at my ideas. Selling the house to downsize? Really? What about our inheritance? Those words were daggers I endured silently, because I always believed in family. But the truth hit me like ice one night while balancing my retirement paperwork. They expected my sacrifices to fund their entire lifestyle, and they felt entitled to it. The first real spark of anger came on my 65th birthday. I had invited them to a quiet dinner at my condo in Lakeview, thinking a simple evening would reconnect us. Instead, the night was a litany of slights. Gabriella rolled her eyes when I mentioned moving into a smaller place. Lucas complained that my plans to travel the country were pointless because I wasn't taking them along or funding their lives. I watched the pain of my sacrifices being dismissed so casually. Years of pouring my energy into their comfort, gone. I could feel my hands trembling as I poured wine, but I didn't let them see it. This wasn't a night for confrontation. This was a night to observe, memorize, and plan. Later, alone in my study, I began reviewing my financials. There it was, decades of careful saving, investments, and retirement funds. My mind raced, not with anger, but with strategy. I realized I didn't owe them a single cent. Every account they expected to inherit could be rerouted. I could do something no one would see coming, and the thought of their faces when they discovered it, that would be the sweetest revenge imaginable. The seed of betrayal was planted, not in me, but in the system they assumed they controlled. And for the first time in years, I felt power. I looked around my apartment, the Chicago skyline glowing through the window. They thought they had me cornered, that their entitlement was a guarantee. Little did they know I had already begun rewriting the rules. Next week, they would come to my lawyer to sign the final documents. And that's when the real shock would hit. The question lingered in my mind as I closed my laptop. Would they ever see me the way I truly was? Or would this be the moment they finally learned that you can't buy love, respect, or gratitude? And with that thought, I smiled quietly to myself, knowing this was only the beginning. They think they control everything. They think years of disrespect mean they get the life I built for them. But sometimes the most dangerous kind of revenge is quiet. And that's exactly what I planned. The days after my 65th birthday were filled with tension I could almost taste. Gabriella called daily with her usual thinly veiled complaints. "Dad, are you sure about this retirement community? Seems cheap." Lucas was worse, texting constant reminders of what they thought I owed them, assuming every dollar was theirs by right. But this time, I didn't react. Instead, I smiled and nodded, listening carefully. Every insult, every entitled remark only sharpened my focus. I began drafting a plan that was simple but foolproof. Every account, every dollar they assumed they'd inherit would quietly be redirected to causes that mattered, causes that would publicly shine a spotlight on my generosity and their ingratitude. I went through my lawyer and financial advisor, carefully setting up charitable accounts in advance. Every detail was meticulous. Retirement funds, redirected to nonprofits supporting immigrant families, stock investments, donated to programs for underprivileged youth in Chicago, savings accounts they thought were theirs, legally tied up in trusts benefiting community centers. Even small, subtle touches. I added letters explaining why I was redirecting the funds, phrased in a way that would make them realize their neglect. The first reveal came as I watched Gabriella glance at my computer screen when I checked my accounts casually during a family Zoom call. She assumed I was tracking her spending or managing her inheritance, but in reality, I was savoring the moment of their impending shock. To the outside world, everything was normal. I smiled, attended family dinners, laughed at their jokes, even the cutting ones. But behind the scenes, every interaction was fuel for my plan. One afternoon, Lucas stopped by unannounced, expecting to see paperwork for his share. He leaned over my desk, smirking, and said, "So, Dad, ready to make this official?" I just nodded slowly, making him wait. The anticipation in his eyes was perfect. He had no idea that the document he assumed would make him rich was already finalized, legally sealed for charity, not him. Then came the first small reveal to myself. I saw Lucas in the next room casually reading my retirement plans binder. He laughed at what he thought was my frugality. I bit back a smile because every page he read unknowingly confirmed that the real funds were gone from their reach. I even made a quiet note of the irony. They think they control my life, but they don't even control a single dime. I also began leaving subtle hints. A casually mentioned charity event here, a social media post there, enough to make them curious, but not enough to realize the scale of my plan. It was a slow burn, a psychological trap. The most important part of revenge, I realized, was timing. I had to wait until the perfect moment, when they were most confident, most entitled, most certain of their victory. And that moment would come soon. I could see it in Gabriella's texts, Lucas's phone calls, the arrogance in their tone, the entitlement in their words. They were so sure they had me cornered, but little did they know I was already steps ahead. I poured myself a cup of coffee that evening and stared out at the Chicago skyline. A smile crept across my face. This was just the beginning. The day I knew would change everything arrived. Gabriella and Lucas thought they were coming to collect what they were owed, but they didn't know they were walking into the one trap I had spent months preparing. I had arranged for Gabriella and Lucas to meet at my lawyer's office, a neutral professional setting. I arrived early, dressed sharply, exuding calm confidence. The office smelled faintly of polished wood and leather, perfect for a scene of confrontation. When they arrived, they were smug, brimming with entitlement. Gabriella smirked, adjusting her designer jacket. Lucas carried his usual air of superiority. They shook my hand perfunctorily and barely acknowledged my presence before heading to the conference room. I could feel the tension in my chest, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. Every step, every word, every smirk of theirs fueled a quiet satisfaction I had been building for months. My lawyer, a calm, stern woman named Marianne, began reviewing the final documents. Gabriella leaned forward expectantly, eager to see her inheritance details. Lucas was already eyeing the charts, calculating in his mind how he would spend the money. And then Marianne handed me a sealed envelope. "Thiago, please read this aloud," she said. I smiled faintly and opened the envelope, glancing at Gabriella and Lucas. "This is the final allocation of my funds," I began, "and the first note is for Gabriella." I read slowly, deliberately. "Gabriella, your behavior over the years, disrespect, entitlement, and lack of gratitude, has convinced me to redirect your inheritance to support programs helping immigrant families start new businesses. I hope this teaches the value of gratitude and humility." Gabriella's smile faltered. Lucas leaned back, confused. "Wait, what?" he muttered. I continued. Lucas, your share is also redirected to programs supporting underprivileged youth in Chicago. This is a decision I've made thoughtfully, and legally it cannot be reversed. The room went silent. Gabriella's face turned pale. Lucas's jaw tightened. You could feel the disbelief in the air, the shift from arrogance to shock. Their entitlement, which had been so obvious, was crumbling in real time. I stayed calm, letting the weight of my words and the documents sink in. No yelling, no accusations, just truth. Then came the twist. I handed them another set of letters, personalized notes I had written months earlier. Each one highlighted specific moments of neglect, selfishness, and disrespect over the years. Do you remember ignoring my birthday dinner in 2015? One letter began. Or mocking my job when I asked for your advice? Gabriella looked like she might faint. Lucas slammed his hand on the table. Dad, this isn't fair, he shouted. I smiled. Fair? I've been fair all my life. This is justice. The lawyer closed the folder and leaned forward. Everything is legally binding. There's nothing more to discuss. I watched Gabriella and Lucas argue quietly among themselves, their faces twisted with disbelief and humiliation. But I knew the real moment, the one that would hit them hardest, was still coming. As I left the office, I felt a strange sense of liberation. This wasn't just about money, it was about respect, recognition, and finally reclaiming the life I had built while raising ungrateful children. And yet, I knew the next week the world outside would amplify the consequences of my actions. Social media, neighbors, friends, they would all see the charitable impact. The final public revelation was coming. I thought the hardest part was over after the lawyer meeting. But I realized the true power of revenge isn't just private, it's public. And that's when the full weight of my plan hit Gabriella and Lucas like a freight train. The week after the lawyer meeting, I started sharing subtle updates on my social media. Not for attention, but to quietly announce the charitable impact. Pictures of new community centers, stories of immigrant families thriving, small videos of children learning trades. They were all my doing, legally, financially, and morally. I watched Gabriella and Lucas from the corner of my eye, noticing their confusion. They expected quiet compliance, a let's move on reaction from the world. Instead, they were being outshined publicly by the very parent they dismissed for years. The first public shock came when one of the charities I supported posted a video thanking me personally. The post went viral in our local community. Friends, neighbors, and even local news outlets started congratulating me. Gabriella called me, voice shaky. Dad, what is this? Why is everyone talking about these donations? I smiled calmly. Because this is the life I chose to live, Gabriella. One of impact, respect, and integrity. You'll have to adjust to the fact that your expectations are no longer reality. Lucas's attempt to intervene failed. Social media and friends began sharing posts highlighting my contributions, my children's absence from family philanthropy, and their entitled attitudes. Every like and comment felt like a tiny victory. They tried to spin it. Gabriella posted her own story online, attempting to frame me as selfish. Lucas called friends and family, trying to gain sympathy. But every post and message backfired. The community overwhelmingly supported me. The world recognized the years of my hard work and sacrifices. I sat back, quietly sipping coffee, observing the perfect irony unfold. They had been taught one lesson after another, first in the lawyer's office, now in the court of public opinion. The final blow came unexpectedly. One of the charitable programs I funded invited me to speak at a small community gala. Media coverage captured my story. A retired immigrant parent who outwitted entitled children and redirected wealth to help others thrive. Photos circulated, me smiling with grateful families, my children's absence glaring in the frame. Comments online praised my generosity and foresight, subtly shaming Gabriella and Lucas without me saying a word. They tried confronting me privately afterward. Gabriella's voice trembled. Lucas's pride had vanished. How could you do this? They demanded. I leaned back in my chair, calm, satisfied. I didn't do this to hurt you. I did it to reclaim my life and to remind you that disrespect has consequences. The true satisfaction, I realized, wasn't just in the shock or humiliation. It was in seeing their arrogance crumble, watching the world validate my years of effort, and feeling free for the first time in decades. Gabriella and Lucas had expected money, entitlement, and control. Instead, they got a life lesson they would never forget, and I got my freedom. As I looked out over the Chicago skyline again, I knew the final chapter of this story, the one where I truly reclaim my life, travel, and live unburdened, was still ahead. And this, I thought, was the moment every parent dreams of. Justice served, silently and perfectly. After months of planning, executing, and watching my children's expectations crumble, I finally realized something. The real revenge isn't in the shock or humiliation. It's in living your life fully while they're left to reckon with what they lost. The days following the public reveal were surreal. Gabriella and Lucas tried everything: calls, messages, attempts at manipulation, but the legal documents and public attention made it impossible for them to claw back anything. They began to understand the depth of their mistake. Gabriella sent me a long, apologetic email that read more like a confession than reconciliation. Lucas tried to confront me in person, his words half pleading, half accusatory. I listened calmly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue, because I knew this was no longer about proving a point. It was about living proof of victory. I began my new life. I downsized my Chicago apartment, traveled across the U.S., and reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with while raising two children who never appreciated me. At the same time, I kept an eye on the charities I funded. I received updates: young immigrant families opening businesses, children learning trades, neighborhoods improving. Every story was a reminder that the wealth my children took for granted was changing lives for the better. The first real evidence of triumph came quietly. Gabriella called one day, voice trembling. "Dad, seeing all of this, I never realized." I didn't need to finish her sentence. The look of regret in her voice was more satisfying than any confrontation. Lucas tried to downplay it, claiming, "It's not a big deal, Dad. You didn't really take anything away from us." I smiled knowingly. I didn't take anything. I gave it to people who deserved it. But what you lost? That's irreversible. He had no comeback. The realization sank in. Years of entitlement, disrespect, and disregard could not be undone. Their expectation of inheritance, comfort, and control they had evaporated. And the world, the community around us, friends, neighbors, recognized my wisdom and generosity. Then came the final poetic twist. A local news feature highlighted my story: an immigrant father outsmarting entitled children and transforming his retirement into a legacy of impact. The article went viral on local networks and social media. Comments poured in: admiration, support, and even subtle shaming of Gabriella and Lucas for their previous behavior. Public validation amplified my personal victory. I didn't just win privately, I had won in the eyes of the world. For the first time in decades, I felt fully free, unburdened, and recognized, not for money or status, but for integrity, foresight, and action. I traveled, explored passions I had long delayed, and invested in experiences that enriched my life. Meanwhile, Gabriella and Lucas were forced to confront the reality of their own choices. No screaming, no humiliation necessary. The consequences were organic, undeniable, and irreversible. And that, I realized, was the most satisfying revenge of all. They thought money and entitlement defined life. I showed them life is defined by respect, gratitude, and action. And that lesson will stay with them forever. Sometimes, revenge doesn't require anger or cruelty. It requires patience, strategy, and living your best life while the people who wronged you watch from the sidelines, powerless. I, Thiago Oliveira, finally did just that. And the satisfaction? Priceless.
Thank you for being here. If you enjoyed this, go watch the one on the left and don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel for more tales of triumph over injustice and a saga of ultimate revenge.